Good morning. It's January 12th, 2025. I'm Nerve Gorilla. If you don't want to hear me talking about this audiobook, the link is going to be in the comments and in the live stream pinned to it. Download audiobook. So I'm bringing up this audiobook. It's called Not Quite the Classics by Colin Mochrie. It is no longer in print. You cannot find it to purchase, and I hate books like that. And it blows my mind because this was released in 2014, not that old. I'm going to share my screen and kind of show you here. Let's see. Let's get rid of this text here. So, minimize this crap. So I downloaded this book and I was looking into it. Couldn't find it on eBay. Couldn't find it on Amazon. When you go to Amazon, the original link right here, it says not found. And that's kind of weird for an audiobook because you guys ought to know this too. Audiobooks are digital. Therefore, you can't be out of stock. So how is it possible that you can't even buy this audiobook anymore, even if you wanted to? So the only way, of course, to see what the website looked like is, of course, use the Wayback Machine. And here it is right here. And Audible, unabridged, Colin Mochrie. There was people who bought it and reviewed it and whatever. If you go to Audible's website, you also can't find this audiobook. I don't know why. I hate when shit like that happens. So this is why I'm making the book available and allow you to download the full thing DRM free, so it's not lost to time. Because I hate when things are lost to time. It's one of the great things about the internet is that we don't have to allow things to be lost to time anymore. So I'm going to link it. I just did. If you don't know who Colin Mochrie is, he was that guy on the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway? Here it is.
Our new 3
That's Colin on the right.
CD set all about the attorney. 52 songs on 3 CDs. Huh?
Why, that divides evenly, doesn't it?
It sure does.
So it's I've always liked Colin Mochrie. I think he's a funny guy. I don't know if the book's any good. We're going to listen to a little bit of it. But who cares about me? His glasses are upside down. So he's kind of a creative guy. He's an ad-libber, basically. But yeah, so I've tried to find out as much as I could about this. He had a 55-minute interview here on YouTube about it. And there's only one current available website that I could find on Google that even mentions this book. And of course, you can't download it. 5 hours and 50 minutes, not all that long. So it pisses me off that this shit is out of print. And it's a digital book. It's not even a physical thing. Out of print physical would make more sense. It's like we're not making these CDs anymore, so it's out of print, right? Well, this isn't a CD, it's digital. So yeah, let's listen to it, and I'm going to play some World of Warcraft. That's about it for me. Who cares about me?
This is Audible.
Audible Incorporated presents Not Quite the Classics. Written by Colin Mochrie, narrated by Colin Mochrie. Introduction. Writing is a lot of work, and as it happens, I am not a fan of work. One of the reasons I became an improviser was so that my workload would be light. I don't have to learn lines or go for wardrobe fittings. I don't have to travel with equipment or an entourage, mainly because no one wants to do things for me. I just need a stage and someone to work with, and off I go. Simple. Easy. No heavy lifting. The best thing about writing is that I'm sitting down while I do it. The worst thing, and I cannot stress this enough, is that it is work. If you were to transcribe any of the scenes we did on Whose Line Is It Anyway, they would rarely, if ever, make sense. Each scene was a mixture of suggestions from the audience, our own creativity, and sometimes liquor. Improvisation is an art form of the moment, and each moment can lead to a multitude of tangents that for that brief time make absolute sense. Writing a book, though, means making sense forever. That's work. And don't get me started on punctuation and spelling. Those 3 little dots that lead to nowhere, it's called an ellipsis. Who knew? Who needs to know? I never wanted to write a book. Period. Oh, don't get me wrong, I love books. From the very first classic I read, The Cat in the Hat, I was hooked. Books made up the bulk of my birthday and Christmas presents. Then I discovered the public library. Having been blessed with the ability to read quickly and early, I'd take out 7 books every week, finish them, then head back for more. Every genre intrigued me. Louis L'Amour westerns, Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, Dashiell Hammett's crime novels, Peanuts and Doonesbury comic strip collections. Books taught me everything from how to stick-handle a puck and build models to how to cook dinner, mix a cocktail, and find a cheap hotel in Paris. Books were invaluable to me during the raging hormones of puberty. Finding a quiet corner in a library and perusing The Happy Hooker, Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, and The Sensuous Man readied me for the onset of manhood that I was sure was just around the corner. It wasn't, but that's another story. Then I discovered used bookstores, the best places to get discounted second-hand comics. Those were the days when a giant Superman went for $0.25, and vendors didn't know how valuable the vintage titles were. Soon I was scanning the shelves for hidden treasures. A dog-eared copy of David Niven's exceptional memoir, The Moon's a Balloon, Agatha Christie's last Poirot book, Curtain, missing its cover, but thankfully none of its pages, Stephen King's Salem's Lot, filled with what I hope were coffee stains. By the way, Steve, how can you write a 1,000-page book every year? Come on, it's insane. I can still smell that strange book smell that made me feel I'd been transported back in time. There is no aroma that takes me back to a time of my life more vividly than the scent of a musty tome. Yeah, you read that right. Musty tome. Not only my rap name, but also an example of the only kind of writing I thought I was capable of before not quite the classics. Write a book? Me? Question mark. It all started with my manager, Jeff Andrews, saying, "Col, why don't you write a book?" Jeff is constantly trying to get me to work. In the 20 years that he has represented me, he's never steered me wrong. Except for that time he got me involved in a 3-day New York dance recital where I had to play one of Cinderella's stepsisters in drag. It's one of the reasons I love him. Another reason is that he's the only person in the world I can say no to. So naturally, when he brought up this idea, I said no. What would I write about? My life? I've been very fortunate and have had a wonderful life, but to be honest, it's really not that interesting. It would go something like this. I was born, grew up in the normal way, got married to a beautiful woman, had a wonderful kid, got a British TV show called Whose Line Is It Anyway, which became successful, and moved to the U.S. All the cast members were good friends, so no Hollywood gossip there. It led to other work. The marriage is still happy. The boy is now a lovely young man, and here we are. See? At most, I could stretch it into a pamphlet. Undeterred, Jeff got me a literary agent who secured a book deal. I had to write a book. Damn. Expletive. I knew for sure that this book would not be a novel. I wanted to incorporate my improv skills into this terrifying adventure, and as a practitioner of short scenes, short stories seemed to be the way to go. Then I was hit with a stroke of, if not genius, at the very least high-functioning smarty-pantedness. There's an improv game called First Line, Last Line, in which the beginning and the ending are supplied by the audience, and the improvisers make up the rest. I could do that in a book. Take the first and last line of famous novels, make up the middle, and voila! So I found 12 classics with first and last lines that inspired me. That was tougher than it sounds. Many great novels have a terrific first line, but the last line can be a killer. Take, for example, Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. First line. The family of Dashwood had been long settled in Sussex. Nice. Vague enough to go anywhere, but still has characters and a location. Last line. Between Barton and Delaford, there was that constant communication which strong family affection would naturally dictate. And among the merits and the happiness of Eleanor and Marianne, let it not be ranked as the least considerable that though sisters and living almost within sight of each other, they could live without disagreement between themselves or producing coolness between their husbands. That's pretty specific. It's also lengthy and dull. So I went back to my first favorite, Dr. Seuss's The Cat in the Hat. My zombie version flowed out of me like one of those rare, perfectly improvised scenes. Other stories lurched and buckled. No flow. They were the dreaded work. Some surprised me, like the Sherlock Holmes tale, which needed the least amount of editing and was the most fun to write. Through it all, I learned something. I despised writing. Not the conjuring of the story, but the actual typing. My fingers could never keep up with my mind. I believe this is what one would call a first world problem. Still, I got through it, and with the end of every story came a feeling of accomplishment. I couldn't have done it alone. Thanks to my wife, Deborah McGrath, whose support and undying love definitely colored some of the women found in this book. Thanks to my son, Luke, without question, my best work, who thinks I'm funny even when I'm not. To Jeff Andrews for pushing me into this. To Carly Waters, my ever-supportive literary agent, whose notes and advice on my first 3 test stories were invaluable. And to Adrian Kerr, my editor, whose enthusiasm and gentle critique took me further than I thought I could go. To every author, published and unpublished, just for doing the work. Kudos! And finally, to the writers whose lines I appropriated, thanks. I may not have read all your books, but I have seen all the movies. So, there you go. All the groaning and moaning, all the rewriting and editing, all the deadlines, missed and otherwise, are done. I wrote a book! Exclamation point. A Study in Ha-Ha. Inspired by Arthur Conan Doyle's A Study in Scarlet. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, who was usually very late in the mornings, save upon those not infrequent occasions when he was up all night, was seated at the breakfast table. His back was to me, but I could ascertain from his posture and almost preternatural stillness that he was working through some problem with that incredibly nimble mind of his. Mindful of how interruptions during this process would annoy the great consulting detective, I strove to show no sign of occupying the room. "Watson, do sit down," Holmes barked, in a tone equal parts irritation and patronizing dismissiveness. "You are one of the few people I know who can actually be more disruptive being stealthy. You're louder than a bagpiper at a Scottish wedding." "I do apologize, Holmes, for disturbing you, but to be fair, I too am a tenant here, and should be allowed space to breathe. Would you not agree?" "It was not your breathing that alerted me to your presence," Holmes said dryly. "What was it, then? Oh, please do tell, so that I can endeavor to eradicate this predilection from my repertoire." "Your sarcasm is duly noted. Those Oxfords you're wearing emitted a C-sharp, identical to a note that was misplayed during a performance by the Lower Slaughter String Quartet at a charity ball I was unfortunate enough to attend a fortnight ago." I stood still for a moment, processing the information. "Oh, you mean my shoes squeaked. Dear Lord in heaven, Holmes, it's a fortunate thing that our life expectancy is not shortened with each word we use. Otherwise, you would have not made it out of the nursery." Holmes, quite surprisingly, smiled. "That was amusing, Watson." "Oh, well, thank you. Yes, quite amusing. The premise that life expectancy is inversely proportionate to loquaciousness, paired with the obviously silly supposition that I was a verbose toddler, yes, quite amusing." Holmes trailed off, making some notes. "Is there tea?" I inquired. "Yes," Holmes muttered. "Here." He gestured to a side table. I poured myself a cup and sat across from him. "Since I've interrupted you anyway, I suppose no harm could come of my asking you, what is it that concerns you so? A new case, perhaps? Is Moriarty up to his old tricks? Or could it be some family crisis with Mycroft?" "Watson," Holmes said, impatiently tapping his pipe in the ashtray, "would you like me to answer, or do you wish to make endless suppositions based on not one fact in your possession?" My sheepish silence was answer enough. "Fine, then. Let me illuminate you.
With that, he bounded out of his chair and, grabbing me by the arm, led me to the lamp on the far wall. Then he leaned back, crossed his arms, and laughed. "Holmes, have you taken leave of your senses? What are you doing?"
Why, Watson, I am illuminating you.
I sneered. "Oh, I see. A pun, is it? I suppose you think that's hilarious."
No, though I was hoping for a more favorable reaction from you. What with the pun being the basis of all humor, I was sure that you would be affected in a highly positive way.
"Now look here, Holmes." Before I could continue my protestation, he rushed back to his breakfast table and proceeded to scribble feverishly on some foolscap. I must confess that his behavior was becoming increasingly irritating. I thought I'd become quite inured to the eccentricities of my friend, but these ramblings, followed by bursts of physical exertion, were beyond the pale. "Holmes, I must insist that you inform me as to what the blazes is going on." Holmes looked up at me, and for the briefest of moments, smiled. He jumped from the chair, made his way to the fireplace, then whipped around to face me. Quite often, Holmes became very dramatic in the lead-up to one of his pronouncements. In this instance, he reminded me of Sarah Bernhardt, about to launch into the to-be or not-to-be soliloquy. Holmes seemed to make a mental note of that, then spoke.
Watson, as you know, I get bored quite easily. Since there has been a paucity of truly challenging cases lately, I have been dabbling in various experiments to keep my mind limber.
My eyes involuntarily darted to the spot where I'd hidden his needles.
I am not speaking of the remedies I employ to keep my spirits up.
I glanced at the liquor cabinet.
Nor have I overindulged in any other vice, Watson. I think you shall be surprised when I tell you what has ignited my interest.
My eyes strayed to the spot where I'd secreted some reading material that, though in my possession purely for scientific reasons, may be considered inappropriate, even for gentlemen of the medical sciences.
Watson, are you hiding anything else in our rooms? Your eyes are bulging and darting about like that of a stroke victim. It's very off-putting.
Holmes, what is it? What is this new fascination?
Humor.
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 I'm afraid you've lost me.
Last night, after supper, I became quite restless.
His eyes fixed upon me with his customary intensity.
I tell you, Watson, you will never grasp what torture it is when I have nothing to occupy my mind. I cannot rest. I must always have something percolating. As I'm sure you are aware, I am often trying to perfect my ability to blend in at any event, in any location.
Ah, yes. Your penchant for disguises.
Correct. I've perfected a camouflage that would allow me to go anywhere in the city and fit right in. I made my way to...
What was the disguise? I asked.
But it makes no difference to what I'm about to tell you. I made my way to the Lambkin and Puffin, a boisterous pub in...
Well, I'm sure it wasn't a beggar.
What?
Your disguise, not a beggar. You said it could get you anywhere. Being done up like a beggar would make you stand out in most quarters. A postman? No, not at night, surely.
As I said before, the disguise matters not. May I get on with my story, Watson?
A dog. A dog could be most places. Were you camouflaged as a dog?
Think, man, how could I pass as a dog?
Well, you'd have to remove your pipe.
Madeline.
Excuse me?
Madeline was my disguise, a lady. Watson, I was dressed as a lady, whom I have named Madeline. In this guise, I could be anything from a lowly streetwalker to the wife of a well-to-do banker, depending on station or location, of course.
At the thought of Holmes dressed as a woman, I became slightly ill.
Depending more on the amount of light, I should think. I'll have you know the disguise was a resounding success. I had many an admiring glance tossed my way. Are you all right, old boy? You look a trifle green.
No, I'm fine. Please, finish your story.
To test my disguise, I walked around joining various groups of revelers in escalating stages of drunkenness. The revelers, not I.
and was drawn to one group in particular whose members were enthralled listening to a large, portly fellow telling stories. Holmes paused, and his eyes seemed to burrow right through me. Funny stories, Watson. I don't know if the stories were true, but they seemed so. They illumined our social mores, our intimate relationships with others, and all with a comical twist that quite accentuated our human foibles. Even I chortled at least twice, and outright guffawed 3 times. Holmes fell silent. I felt I should add to the conversation. Oh. It wasn't much, but it seemed to urge Holmes on. Then the most amazing thing happened. Amazing and infuriating. I said something in reply to one of the monologues, and the crowd, as if there were a single organism, laughed. A loud laugh. Watson, I have never experienced such a feeling. Every nerve ending seemed on fire, and I was flushed with some emotion that I still can't put a name to. It was as if some euphoric drug had just entered my bloodstream. It was the first time I could recall Holmes ever being speechless. It was most disturbing. Holmes, you said it was amazing and infuriating. Why infuriating? Holmes looked at me with almost haunted eyes. I can't remember what I said. Not one part of it. He paused. But this experience has spurred me on to a new endeavor, one that might actually bring me happiness. I call it stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy? Yes. On the first Saturday of every month, the Lambkin and Puffin stages a talent show made up of the locals performing whatever party tricks they can devise. I will write 10 to 20 minutes of highly humorous material, and I will perform 3 weeks hence. I will write comedy, and I will stand up as I interpret it. Stand-up comedy. A look of skepticism must have traveled my countenance, for Holmes fixed his gaze upon me. Yes, Watson, you have something to say? Well, Holmes, I think that... Well, what I mean to say is that... And this is coming from a place of friendship and nothing else. I certainly don't... Spit it out, man! You're not funny. Holmes looked as though he had found a centipede in his cockaliki. Not funny? Well, not in a humorous way, certainly. Your sarcasm can be amusing sometimes, if one is not the target of its venomous bite, but I certainly don't think of you as one of the great wits in my social sphere. You laughed at something I said only a few days ago at the grocer's, Holmes said indignantly. No. No, it was not what you said. It was when you banged your knee against the coconuts. It made a funny sound. Coconuts? Yes, coconuts. Holmes inspected his shoes for a few moments. I must confess, Watson, you have hurt me in a manner I did not think possible. I do apologize. No need. It just spurs me on to prove you wrong. I believe I am up to the challenge. He ran to the calendar on the wall and circled the date. On this day, a mere 3 weeks from now, I shall prove to you that I am, in fact, quite humorous. I shall expect you to be in the audience when I take to the stage. Certainly, Holmes, certainly. Then, as the cannibal toy-maker said to his friend, the game's afoot. Holmes stood there awaiting a reaction. I could not give him the one he desired. Perhaps you should stay away from puns, I smiled weakly. Holmes glared and then made his way to the study, leaving me with a burgeoning sense of foreboding. In the following days, Holmes kept to his study, writing furiously, collecting or discarding premises, joke structures, and other mysterious fancies. After one 3-hour period, hunkered down in his room, he bounded out with such vigor I expected him to shout Eureka and explain Archimedes' principle to me. It's mathematical, Watson. All mathematical. Well, I'm sure I would agree, Holmes, if in fact I knew what you were talking about. Comedy. It follows the same mathematical principles as music. It's all about rhythm and emphasis. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da. He laughed. Well, it might be funnier with actual words. Before Holmes could dispatch a withering riposte, Mrs. Hudson appeared at the door. "Mr. Holmes, a package has just come for—" Before the poor woman could finish, Holmes had leapt towards her, grabbed the package, and began ripping it open. "Well, I never," she gasped. "Well, now, Mrs. Hudson, I'm almost positive that isn't true," Holmes retorted. I'm not quite sure why, but I burst into laughter, and was at once mortified. "Please excuse us, Mrs. Hudson, but we are in the middle of a case that is quite—" "I don't want to know about it," she said. "I should have rented to accountants. They know how to treat a landlady, I'm sure." She left in a huff. "Watson, it's come!" Holmes held aloft a leather-bound book, quite thick and possessing that intoxicatingly musty odor exuded by only the most ancient of tomes. "What is it, Holmes?" "This, my dear Watson, is the oldest joke book in existence. Philogelios, the Laugh Addict, attributed to a pair of Greeks named Heracles and Philagrius." "Surely you can't be thinking of using these jokes? They were written centuries ago. How could any of this be relatable today? This certainly will not help your erected comedy." "Stand-up comedy, Watson, stand-up. And you may be surprised to know that many of these jokes are still relatable to modern times. For example," he quickly leafed through the book. "Ha! No. That would only work if one knew that the ancients believed letters to be an aphrodisiac." He raised an eyebrow at me. "You didn't happen to know that, did you?" "No, Holmes, I didn't. Is there any reason I should?" No, of course not." "Oh, here we go. A misogynist is attending to the burial of his wife, who has just died. When someone asks, 'Who is it who rests in peace here?' he answers, 'Me, of course, now that I'm rid of her.'" I allowed myself a chuckle. "Yes, I see, Holmes. I suppose drolleries about matrimonial life remain relevant regardless of the age." Holmes continued to leaf through the book. "Not only matrimony, but family relations, stupidity." He stopped at a page. "Even flatulence. Things still relevant today." A notion struck me. "I have to say, though, hearkening back to your mathematical theory of joke-telling, that particular quip you just relayed seemed to have too many beats. It seems to have thrown off the rhythm." "Well done, Watson. We'll make a thinking man of you yet. Now, there's no reason to—" "I'm joking." "You are right. There were too many syllables. Of course, I was translating from the original Greek, so I should be allowed some latitude. Watson, with my theories, and with the aid of this learned tome, I may be on the brink of being funny." "Dear God, Holmes, if this discovery falls into the wrong hands, civilization as we know it could end." Holmes punctured the awkward silence. "Ah, yes. Exaggerism. An exaggerated witticism that overstates the features, defects, or the strangeness of someone or something. Well played, Doctor. Well played." And with that, he sprinted to his study. I did not see him until 2 o'clock the next afternoon. He leapt out of his room. During the period leading up to his performance, Holmes never just walked out of his study. He bounded, leapt, bobbed, hurtled, sprung, pounced, and one time he gambled. "Tell me, Doctor, which is funnier, a goat or a duck?" "I beg your pardon?" "It's a simple query. Goat or duck?" "Well, duck." At that, Holmes dropped down as if dodging a projectile. A few seconds later, he popped up. "Did you see what I did there? I mistook your meaning of duck and turned it into a humorous situation." "Holmes, have you had any sleep?" "No time. Awake or asleep, the duck misunderstanding is highly amusing. And you are right. Duck is funnier. Do you know why?" Holmes raised an eyebrow. Because its alternative meaning allows you to do physical comedy. No, because it has a K in it. The letter K is funny, is it? Not in and of itself. It's the K sound that prompts amusement. When a mouth forms the K in any word, it widens into a grin, subconsciously making those observing this smile along. Many words that are endowed with the K factor are among the most amusing in the English language. Think of it. Knickers, scuttlebutt, spelunking. I have to admit, I always have to conceal a smirk when introduced to a Kenneth. I studied Holmes' tired face. Would you like me to make you something to eat? I can't remember the last time I saw you indulge in foodstuffs. Thank you, Watson. That is very considerate. What would you like? It's obvious. He smiled. Kippers, of course. The next day, as I was going over some particularly intriguing anatomical texts, Holmes barreled out of his room. Watson, knock, knock. Ah, ha. Yes, very funny, Holmes. What is? Your 2K sounds, yes, quite amusing. No, this is a different thing altogether. Knock, knock. I stared at him. Knock, knock, Holmes repeated. Why do you keep saying knock, knock? It's something I have just invented. Well, to be truthful, I borrowed it from Shakespeare. The Porter? From Macbeth? Are you familiar with it? Yes, Holmes, I am. I'm not illiterate, you know. I have read plays and books. You may have seen me with a newspaper at times. All right. No need to get your dander up. The porter in the Scottish play pretends to be the porter to the gates of hell, welcoming sinners of different professions. All follow the pattern of knock, knock, to which comes the reply, who's there? Then comes the joke. In the play, it was a monologue, but I have devised it so the audience can become part of the fun. How will they know when to say who's there? Holmes seemed nonplussed. What? How, I said, unconsciously slowing down as if talking to a Frenchman or a somewhat addled cocker spaniel, will the audience know to say who's there? I shall tell them. That does not matter at the moment. I am trying to work the concept to see if the format is successful. All right, who's there? Wait for the setup, will you? Knock, knock. Yes? Not yes. Who's there? Let's start again, shall we? Holmes sighed loudly. Knock, knock. Who's there? I said. 'Tis I, Sherlock Holmes. Don't you recognize me? I stood stock still, not knowing how to respond. Holmes, too, seemed a little uncertain. He said. There's something missing. But what? What? Of course. There's no familiarity with the concept. So there can be no deconstruction at this particular... He trailed off, lost in thought. Watson, after I say, who is at the door, repeat the name I give you, adding the word who. All right, Holmes. Knock, knock. Who's there? Sherlock. Sherlock who? Affecting a perfect Irish accent, Holmes replied, Sure. Lock the door so I can't get in. I laughed. Heaven help me, I laughed. I have never seen Holmes' face so lit up as when he heard that laugh. It worried me. And so it was for the days leading up to Holmes' debut as a standing-up comedian. Just as I was growing accustomed to his prolonged absences, he would launch himself from his study, talking about the science of eliciting laughter. If you have never had to sit through such a lecture, I can tell you, it is the driest, most mind-numbing subject ever. The worst part of the whole process was that Holmes seemed physically unable to let any word, phrase, or idea pass by without turning it into a joke. It was most annoying. The closer the day of his performance drew, the more high-strung he became. The foreboding I felt would not leave me. The fateful day arrived. Holmes was not about when I made my way to breakfast. A cursory search of the flat did not turn him up. There was, however, a note. Watson, I shall see you tonight at the show. Please wish good thoughts for me. I fear that all may not go according to plan. The sick feeling in my stomach grew acute. That evening I made my way to the Lambkin and Puffin. It was not located in the most savory of neighborhoods, yet it was pleasantly appointed, and the ale was better than many of the higher-class public houses I frequented. I looked around for Holmes, but he was nowhere to be seen. For a brief moment I entertained the thought that perhaps he had thought better of this venture. Then again I thought, Sherlock Holmes has faced dangers that would make the stoutest of men blanch. Surely reciting comic material in a pub before a drunken crowd would not unnerve him. The master of ceremonies, a coarse, affable type, introduced the first act, an immense matron whose repertoire of light opera ditties enthralled the audience, for 2 or 3 songs. After the 5th, she was booed handily and left the stage in tears. She was followed by a dog act, an acrobat, and a man who performed various bird whistles from his posterior. At last, it was time for Holmes. He received hearty applause, for he had acquired some fame in these parts, having solved a missing persons case involving a popular local merchant. My heart sank as I saw him walk on stage. He had the telltale signs of having indulged in his favorite vice. I swore silently to myself. Cocaine and comedy could not be a good mix. Holmes spoke. "Thank you for the kind welcome. I must admit I didn't think I would get here in time. You see, my dog, a lovely Rottweiler, has a bit of a physical impediment. As a caring master, I took him to the veterinarian. My dog's cross-eyed. Is there anything you can do for him?" "Well," says the vet, "let's have a look at him." He picks the dog up and examines his eyes, then checks his teeth. Finally he says, "I'm going to have to put him down." I was aghast. "What? You have to put my dog down because he's cross-eyed?" "No," said the veterinarian. "I have to put him down because he's heavy." The audience laughed robustly. Then Holmes did something I have never seen him do. He giggled. It was quite inappropriate and not a little unmanly. It seemed to take the audience aback. Holmes appeared not to notice as he launched into his second story. My landlady, Mrs. Hudson, also had a bit of a health crisis. She told her doctor, "I've got a bad back." The doctor said, "It's old age." She said, "I want a second opinion." So the doctor said, "Certainly. You're ugly, too." Holmes giggled once more. I have to say I was not in the least amused. Mrs. Hudson, while perhaps not the greatest beauty in London, is nevertheless not ugly. I was quite relieved that she had decided not to see Holmes in his inaugural performance. The next joke did little to appease my growing uneasiness. As an expert in various subjects, I'm often asked to give lectures to committees and the like. Once I was asked by the Women's Institute to give a talk about sex. I didn't mind agreeing to give the talk, but I was a bit worried that my friend and biographer, Dr. Watson, wouldn't like me doing it. He's very prudish about subjects dealing with intimacy. What an outrageous lie! But since I had not a voice in these proceedings, I was forced to sit and bear this gross injustice. So, as to spare his feelings, I told the dear doctor that I was engaged to talk to the Women's Institute on the subject of sailing. The day after my lecture, Watson bumped into the chairwoman of the Women's Institute. "I thought the talk Mr. Holmes gave last night was quite excellent," said the chairwoman. "He certainly seemed an expert on the subject." "Did he?" asked the doctor. "I'm quite surprised. He hardly knows anything about it. He's only done it twice, the first time he was sick, and the second time his hat blew off." The audience laughed at first, And then the greater implications of the story seemed to dawn on them. That I knew all about Holmes' intimacies, either through his confidence or through personal knowledge.